Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and I'll be with you for the next 25 minutes or so, taking you through some news stories from around the UK and also giving you some better biking tips. I'll be talking about a novel braking technique at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. Sit yourself down with a brew and if you don't forget, if you can't make it live, you can catch up on my YouTube channel or over at mycoffee.com page. Right, okay, so moving rapidly on, the thing I wanted to show you was a photograph. Let's just get the photograph up. I've got the wrong photograph up at the moment. Hang on just a second. Let me just find the right one. It is here somewhere. There it is. Motorcyclists generally have had a long history of modifying their bikes, and of course you'll recall that the very first motorcycle was in fact a bicycle with a petrol engine in the frame. But times have changed since those early pioneering days, and so the rules. And police in Devon seized this particular machine. As you can see, it's a mountain bike effectively being powered by a small petrol engine. The male rider was spotted riding this contraption around in the Paynton area, and the bike was promptly impounded and classified as hazardous waste. And the rider, unfortunately, was reported for riding a motor vehicle without insurance and for driving without a license. So, you know, obviously enough, if you've got something like this, it is a powered vehicle, it does count as a motorcycle, even if it is home brewed. Why hazardous waste? Well, according to a spokesman, petrol powered engines or bikes with a battery are classified as hazardous waste because they need to be stored and disposed of correctly. Apparently, the bike was, having been seized, was pushed back to a police office in Paynton, then taken from there by a recovery company to be properly disposed of. All costs apparently are passed on to the motorist, or the vehicles are sold on. I think somehow, I don't think they'll be getting any money back on this one. Morning to Jack and Nigel. Hello, guys. Nice to see you here again. Right, okay, so the second story I've got for you this morning is a rather tragic one. An inquest in Denbighshire in Wales found that a 64-year-old man died from smoke inhalation after a fire at his home, which was likely to have been caused by the electric motor in a reclining chair. Paul McKee, age 64, was known for stockpiling motorcycle parts, however, and he was found dead in his reclining chair, surrounded, according to the inquest, by molten materials. A neighbour spotted the fire, which was back in May, but couldn't get into the property to help. A fire scene investigator said there was still evidence of hoarding throughout the property. The inquest heard that Mr. McKee has suffered from limited mobility after a motorcycle accident in 1992, and the coroner concluded that his limited mobility could potentially have inhibited his escape. He also had diabetes and would have suffered from hyperglycemic episodes as well. The coroner, John Gittins, recorded a conclusion of accidental death. So that's a rather sad story. Here is something, however, which is rather more alarming. You may recall that at the back end of last year, Hackney Council unveiled plans to charge for motorcycle parking. They basically produced a consultation document, which then was published, and they were waiting on input from people before they decided what they would do. In fact, the plans went on hold as the coronavirus crisis hit. But this hasn't deterred Camden Council, who are now planning what have been described as extortionate bike parking charges. Now, the situation is this: at the moment, it's free to park a motorcycle in Camden. However, if the new proposals go through, you'll have to pay to park regardless of whether you're a resident or a visitor. But it doesn't just stop with charging for bike parking. The council are also proposing to remove the dedicated free motorcycle parking bays and replace them with what they term as multi-use bays, and it'll cost £6 a day to park a bike in them. Now, you can do the sums, it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? For somebody working 46 weeks a year, 5 days a week, the bill would therefore be £1,380. Motorcycle News actually reported a figure of £1,560, but who works 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year? I don't think anybody does. But that's only the beginning, because after 2 years, what Camden are proposing is that charge would rise to £5.91 per hour. In other words, that would add up to a whopping £53.19p at the end of a 9-hour parking day, or you can £266 a week, or £12,234 a year, which is a truly astonishing figure. Why these charges? Well, Camden Council wants to be a zero carbon borough by 2030, and they plan to work towards that by reducing air pollution and improving local air quality by reducing the number of high carbon emission and diesel vehicles in and passing through the borough. And so the parking proposals basically treat motorcycles in the same way as petrol engine cars. And the argument is that they will encourage residents to use more sustainable ways of transport. According to the council, the charges would discourage inessential, is that a word? Inessential? Non-essential, surely, motorcycle journeys. The council alleges that there would be benefits as well, because motorcyclists are more likely to be involved in collisions resulting in a fatality or a serious injury to pedestrians and cyclists. Okay. And they also claim that peak sound levels for motorcycles can significantly exceed those for other motor vehicles, creating noise and disturbance for residents. Yeah, all right, fair enough. But their online statement claims that the proposed changes will help improve the air quality and contribute towards their climate goals, and basically encourage people to seek out more sustainable modes of transport when getting around and visiting the borough. Now, this doesn't only affect visitors, because residents who park their motorcycles in parking bays in Camden would also have their permit prices doubled. They would go up from £66.55 to £130.28. And businesses that use motorcycles would also be charged an increased amount. That bill would be £359 per year per bike. Though, frankly, at £1 a day, that sounds like a bargain compared with the poor bloody commuters who are trying to commute to work and park their bikes when they get there. The council claim that there are benefits for switching to electric bikes, but that is only for residents, as far as I can work out from their consultation document. If you would be riding an electric motorcycle into Camden, you'd still be required to pay the same daily parking permit for those shared bays, £6 a day. Not surprisingly, the response from rider groups has been fairly unhappy about it. Lembit Opic, who's the Director of Communications at the Motorcycle Action Group, says it's outrageous. Many of the people this will affect will already be low paid and can't afford to change to a new electric bike or pay these charges. MAG, through Colin Brown, has written a more conciliatory letter offering to help the Borough Council grasp the benefits of motorcycles, and they offer to share knowledge and evidence about the positive impact motorcycling can deliver. And the letter says that Borough Council is missing a key aid in achieving its goals. MAG argues that the actual impact of cars and bikes is very different, and so that the council's blanket approach is actually counterproductive. Colin, who is MAG's Director of Campaigns and Political Engagement, says in his letter, I can see that misunderstandings about motorcycles are influencing the policymakers in Camden. This is not surprising, as these distortions are rarely challenged. The realities, however, are a world apart from outdated views of the motorcycle. There is a clear need to focus on shaping a better future, so we need to throw off these old ideas. We must recognise that motorcycling offers today and in the future. What motorcycling offers today and in the future. At MAG, we are working hard to promote a re-evaluation of motorcycling in transport policy. The future of motorcycling is future of transport, I should say, is multimodal, and motorcycles are a key part of that multimodal future. We all share the goals of reduced congestion, cleaner air, and the reduced CO2 emissions. But if my tongue is tied today, but if we cannot get past prejudices and misconceptions, those goals will be much harder to achieve. Now, if you want to respond to this, you better hurry, because the consultation is only open till December the 18th. And if you are going to respond to it, you need to send an email to permitsreview@camden.gov.uk. Just pop that up for you if you do want to respond. You may be thinking, of course, that this is a London-only problem, but what comes to London sooner or later comes to other cities and towns around the country. If Camden actually managed to achieve this level of charging and basically discrimination against an affordable form of transport, then other cities and towns will look at ways they can exploit it too. So I would seriously suggest that you take a look at this, and even if you don't live in the borough, that you think about getting involved in that consultation. Right, okay, so one more thing to talk about very briefly before I move on to the next story. Oh, I've just gone past it. There we go. Don't forget, my winter gift voucher offer is now open. There are a limited number of these available, and the idea is that you buy a voucher now and you can save later on a practical training course next year, when hopefully when the weather's a bit better than it is today. How it works, well, if you buy a £50 gift voucher and you book a course in 2021, the voucher will be worth £60. So basically you'll save £10 on the course cost. If you buy a £100 voucher and you book a course next year, then the voucher will be worth £120. So you'll make a saving of £20 when you come to take the course. You can buy more than one if you want to, until they run out, of course. And you can buy them for yourself, or you can buy them as a gift. So they are wonderful Christmas presents, so I say it myself. The only provisos to that is you can't get a refund on them, non-refundable once you've bought them, and they cannot be exchanged backwards for cash. But go over to my coffee page. I'll give you the link at the end of the show, and you can find the gift vouchers over there. So, okay, now, here is a date for the diary. If you are a woman rider, there's a new Women in Motorcycling exhibition scheduled to take place on Saturday, 24th of April, 2021. Now, the event is said to bring together those who are experienced riders, learners, and those looking to start but who aren't sure where to begin. The event has something for commuters, pleasure riders, racers, tourers. No matter what you ride now or want to ride in the future, the organisers say they are there to bring you the best of motorcycling into one place. So it's a fun, action-packed day out. And they will be providing an environment where bikes, clothing, accessories, tours, inspirational speakers, workshops, biker buddy meetups, and more merge to create an exciting experience focused on women's needs in the ever-growing market. So what's on offer? Well, there'll be workshops covering things like first aid and motorcycle maintenance, plus other useful hints and tips for motorbike life, apparently. Inspirational speakers and panel talks from up-and-coming racers, bloggers, world explorers, and motorcyclists riding against the odds. There'll be a learner zone, which will help you understand the first steps into biking. And there will naturally be exhibitors with some of the best brands out there. Now, when you get your ticket for this event, you'll be able to wander the site, which is at Tutbury Castle in Staffordshire. And the ticket will give you access to the ruins. You can go along and visit the Great Hall there in the castle, and you can listen to the curator giving a talk on one of the most inspirational women in history, Boudica, or Boadicea, as some people know her. If it's a bit of a ride there and back for you to Staffordshire, then there is a pre-book campsite available in the grounds. But the organisers say book now because pitches are limited. So that's the Women in Motorcycling exhibition, Saturday, 24th of April 2021. You'll find that happening at Tutbury Castle, which is in Staffordshire. And here is the link for you to find out a little more about it. There we go, that's gone up. Right, okay, so that brings me on to the final part of the show. I'll be talking about better braking technique. Now, but before I just head on to that, don't forget that I'm still offering online coaching over the winter. £20 gets you an hour on a topic of your choosing, or anything that you particularly want to talk about. I'm more than happy to work through rider problems with you. And the feedback so far on online coaching sessions has been excellent. So £20 is a bit of a bargain, I say it myself. Okay. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about braking technique. And one of the things I've covered is the need to read your manual. If you've got an advanced braking system on the bike, you need to know how it works. And surprisingly, quite a few of the trainees that I've had on my courses really don't know how it works. So read the manual. I can't be an expert on all the systems on all the bikes. Something else to talk about is how the 75-25 rule of front rear brake balance. The idea is that you put 75% of the front brake force on, and only 25% via the rear brake. That works fine on a standard balanced motorcycle. It doesn't work on a lightweight scooter or a step through, because they are far too light at the front to cope with all that extra braking force. So I talked about how you have to feel what the brakes are doing rather than try to apply a strict rule. I also covered a technique, a very practical one here, for making smoother stops at slow speed. Ideally, I suggested what you do is avoid coming to a halt with the front brake on, because as you all know, as a motorcycle, if we're braking with the front and the rear brake together and the front brake's doing most of the work, then what will happen is the front will dip on the forks, and as soon as you come to a stop, the front rebounds, and that rebound, that bounce, is often a cause of low speed, well, almost stationary, in fact, topple-overs, as people just lose their footing as they're putting their foot down. And what I suggested was that you use the rear brake to actually come to a complete stop. So basically what you do is, as you're braking normally, front brake first, rear brake second, you ease the front brake off while the bike's still moving, and the bike comes to a nice level halt with the back brake only. You get a far better balanced stop there, and that's something I work on some of my courses. So but today I'll go a little bit further about with this rear brake technique. But I must clarify, first of all, this is not something that I am recommending for hard braking, but it is worth trying where there's a significant change of speed required, but where you still have plenty of space to make that change. For example, maybe coming to a hairpin bend on the end of a long straight. You're going to need to slow down a lot for the hairpin bend. So you're probably going to need to use the brakes on most bikes. So have a think about how you can apply those brakes. Have a think about reversing your normal brake order. As we've said, the problem with braking front brake harder at first is that the forks dip. Well, this technique suggests that you use the rear first. And what happens if you use the rear first is that the entire bike squats, it's pulled into the ground, because what's happening is it's actually rotating around the rear axle rather than the front axle. So there's a different place of rotation, and the bike's pulled down onto the road. You then put the front brake on, and because the whole bike has been flattened into the road, the front forks are already partially compressed, so you get much less fork dive using this technique. Why would anybody want to do that when you can brake perfectly happily with the front brake first, rear brake second technique? Well, actually, it works rather well with a passenger on the back. They're not sort of tipped so violently forward, and they're less likely to nut you in the back of the helmet. So it's something you can try two up. Start it light and gentle, obviously, but the basic approach, rear brake first, front brake second, reverses the standard braking technique. And again, that's something I cover on my the theory online briefing to the 2-day performance sport course that I run. And we normally get to try it out on the road as well if we've got time for that. But what about for harder braking? Now, this is where I diverge with some of the reports that have appeared in the biking press and online on various websites. And what was this all came from a piece of research that was done by a group in Canada some years ago, but I think it was about 2011, 2012. Basically, what they did was that they worked in controlled conditions, and the researchers equipped two machines. They were a big cruiser and a sports bike, and they put accelerometers on them, which basically allowed them to measure the deceleration, the rate of deceleration of the bikes. And then they got a selection of riders from relative newbies to experienced rider to practice emergency braking. And then what they got them to do was use two different techniques. They used a front first, rear second, a conventional emergency stop technique that we would teach in the UK and is taught virtually all over the world as far as I know. And then they got the riders to try an alternative technique, which was rear first, front second. And what they did when they published the results was they claimed the novel rear first technique gave better results, that basically that the riders stopped in a shorter distance using the rear first braking technique. So this got quite a lot of publicity on bike forums and in the bike press for a few weeks, and then it kind of largely got forgotten. But why bring this up now if it's all forgotten about? Well, the reason for this is because I read an interesting online article by Matt Oxley, who you may know is a well-respected former racer and currently a journalist. And he was writing about Fabio Quartararo, who you may also know had a fairly successful first half of the MotoGP season this year on his Yamaha M1. And what Quartararo had been doing was working on a rear first, front second braking technique. So once again, this technique has spread over into the bike press, and I found a few people talking about it online. So again, what the idea is, just as I was talking about a moment ago, the idea of the rear first technique is that the whole bike squats, and because the back wheel doesn't unload, if you think about what happens with a standard front first braking technique, the rear goes up in the air. That's why really, ultimately. And of course, as soon as that wheel starts to lift, as soon as the suspension itself starts to extend, you're losing weight off the rear wheel, transfer it to the front. So the rear actually becomes less and less effective for braking. And of course, when it's in midair, it can't do anything at all. So all 100% of our braking force when we're pulling a stoppie is on the front brake. That's fairly obvious. The rear first technique exploits the fact that the back wheel starts on the ground by using a bit of braking force through the rear initially before the weight transfer starts to lift the rear. So the theory is that you can actually stop in a slightly shorter distance by applying the rear brake first. The theory is sound as far as I can see, and Quartararo certainly seems to have managed to exploit it early on in this season. However, there's always a but to things like this. When I actually looked at the study data from that Canadian piece of research, what I found was that they had in fact given us all the clues that we needed to see the problem. They used a scatter graph of results. Now, what a scatter graph is basically is it shows lots of points all over the basically like a dartboard of results. And what it gave you was the ability to see how long it took riders to stop from their experimental data. And what they actually found was that the best results for the rear first technique were in fact slightly shorter. They shaved from their test speeds. I can't remember what they were off the top of my head, and I can't find the article I wrote on it at the time. They shaved a couple of meters off the stopping distance. Now, a couple of meters doesn't sound much, but it could be the difference between a fairly hard thud into the side of a car and stopping upright. So any gain is worth having. But the problem was it was this scatter graph. What it showed was, although the best riders did manage to pull the bike up a bit more quickly, the average of the results was all over the place. A lot of riders took a really, really long time to stop using this technique, presumably because they locked the rear wheel when they applied the front, because as the rear is now biting and the weight transfer goes to the front, if you're not very clever at getting off the rear brake as the rear goes light, you will lock the rear up. Now, with ABS, that's less of a worry, obviously, but most riders would be able their instinct to release the brake when it locks. So their study didn't actually show that riders could use this rear first technique consistently. What it did show was that the riders who used the conventional front first, rear second technique, which they'd been taught in their basic training, were consistent. The average distance was actually just about the same, but the scatter was much tighter. In other words, riders could use that technique reliably. So basically, and one other exception to the rule, the absolute best stops were performed by one rider who used the front brake only. So presumably there was a rider who actually had a perfect feel for what his front brake was doing and could brake as hard as the front tyre could take it. And the reason he was only using the front brake was probably because the back wheel was floating in the air as he stopped. So, okay, conclusions. My conclusion at the time of the Canadian study and my conclusion after reading Matt Oxley's article is that the braking technique, the rear first, front second braking technique, is too hit and miss for hard braking for average road riders on a road surface which has variable consistency. And frankly, even Quattararo's second half of the season fell off a bit as he fell off. So the difficulty is actually maintaining the consistency when we're trying to be clever with our braking technique and swap from front brake first to a rear brake first technique. So by all means, explore it. By all means, try it. As I said, it will smooth out your stops if you're just simply having to lose a lot of speed over plenty of distance. But as an emergency stop technique, I would give it a miss, and I would just basically work on getting your front first, rear second technique consistent. Okay, so that's it for today. Back on Wednesday next week. Don't forget that you have been watching Kevin Williams here with Elevenses, and we will be back on Wednesday next week at 11. And if you missed some of the show, you can either catch up with it live here on Facebook in a few, the recording a few minutes, I should say, here on Facebook, or you can always find it over on my YouTube channel, or it will go up on my coffee page in just a moment too. And I'll also just let you know that I've put a good dozen new articles up over there in the supporter content. So thanks for looking in. What have we got for you next week? Well, I'll be looking at a huge haul of stolen bikes which have been recovered from a pond in northwest London, and there'll be a story on a man who was caught riding a motorbike even though he was disqualified to 2052. I'm just wondering how anybody could be disqualified for that long, but hey ho, there we go. Right, so thank you very much indeed for looking in, and that's it for today. You've been watching Kevin Williams and Elevenses. Back on Wednesday with the next show. Thank you very much.